Good evening. We'll go ahead and, it's 6 o'clock, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you for your attendance. The first item on our agenda is the 2022-2023 Budget Workshop, and I'm going to ask Dr. Wallace to give us an intro to that, please.
Yeah, this is a yearly activity. I know you're just thrilled. It's a lot of data and a lot of information to provide the board, but I just always like to find just a moment to remind the board that this is one of the 3 legislative requirements of boards of regents in the state of Texas for community colleges. There's 3 things that you're legislatively required to do. Number 1 is set the budgets and the financial condition of the college. Number 2 is setting tax rate, which will also be a part of tonight's conversation. And number 3 is hiring and or firing me. And so those are your 3 things. That's not on here. Yes. If you want that, I'd rather not know. But I just always like to do that to say this is really important. Please ask us questions. Please engage in any conversation. There's no question that is inappropriate for this, and we'd love to answer those. And we've got plenty of experts in here if Dr. Miller and I can't answer it. So Dr. Miller will take us through the budget workshop. Yes, sir.
Book that I have prepared for this workshop, and I'm not going to go through it page by page, but you're welcome to call to my attention anything you find in there that you want to ask a question about. But I do want to go through some of the highlights and call your attention to certain items that are in there. We'll start off with revenues, and we're going to look at each of the major revenue streams separately. And of course, we do receive state appropriations, a significant part of our budget. One thing about projecting state appropriations for this year, there's no projections. Our appropriation was set the last legislative session. It was set for 2 consecutive years. So we're going to receive the exact same amount of appropriations this coming year that we have received in the current year. So that there's not a lot of discussion here, but I was looking back through some of our old budgets, and I came across what I thought was some interesting bit of information. I found the budget from the year 2007, so that's 15 years ago. Our overall budget in this 15-year period has doubled from $31 million to $61 million. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to how much our state appropriations have increased by percentage over that same 15-year period? Any ideas? Well, it's gone up roughly 1% a year. It's gone up 15%. So one of the challenges we talk with you all the time, you're well aware of it. The state, we are a state-supported institution, but the percentage of support we get from the state has been dwindling in recent years. So, and we know there's no change for this coming year because appropriation is set. So let's move to the next revenue stream, and that is tuition and fees. And I've provided a lot of background information for you about tuition and fees. One thing about it, we have already set tuition and fees for the upcoming year. We did that at the March board meeting. So there's not a lot for us to work with as far as for the upcoming budget. We've pretty much determined what tuition and fees will be. But you see some statistics there over the recent 6-7 year period, what's happened to our tuition. You'll also see there where we rank among state community colleges as far as our in-district rate at $100 an hour is 19th from high to low in the state. Out of district, we're 5th. Our rate of 190, which we have had, places as the 5th highest out of district rate. So when it comes to tuition and fees, as I just mentioned, we rank 19th and fifth among other community colleges. Do you want to hazard a guess where we ranked 13 years ago in the year 2009? Well, unfortunately, there's been a drastic change. 13 years ago, we were 41st highest in district and 31st out of district. So a lot of the growth that we've encountered in our district, as you know, is out of our out of our taxing district, but in other parts of our service area, and we have had to fund a lot of those activities with tuition and revenue dollars. And so students have been sharing, you could say, a disproportionate burden of the increase in our budget. It'd be nice if the state were keeping up on their end, but just the makeup of our student body, the makeup of our district, how we are set up, a lot of it does fall on the student.
Just a quick comment. This is the work that is being conducted by the Commission on Community College Finance by the state. This is the data they're looking at. And what they're looking at is the inequity of cost efficiency among the 50 community colleges in the state. And that's something that does need to be looked at, because ironically, as you move through this presentation, you will see the tuition and fees that we charge for out of district is greatly related to the valuation and or tax revenue generated in district, and where you can and can't make that up. And there's even further inequity of that when you consider some of the smallest towns in the state of Texas, smallest locations, are having the highest tax rates for their community colleges, and the largest districts have the lowest tax rates. And so that seems very backwards if you were to look at it just from a purely business model. You go, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I remind you that the data you're seeing in the next few pages Dr. Miller covers is all the data that commission is looking at right now. So.
Okay, the next revenue stream that I think we need to move forward and look at is one that we do still have some say over what that revenue is going to be for the coming year, and that is our property tax revenue. All of you know that the next board meeting in August, we will be charged to set a tax rate for the upcoming year. So I really want us to have the opportunity with this workshop and begin this discussion now, so that in August we have a good idea among those here in this room as to where we need to have that tax rate to generate the appropriate tax revenue. Again, there's a lot of supporting documentation here showing things like how our tax rate compares among the other taxing entities in Cook County, how our tax valuations and tax rates compare among all the community colleges in Texas. And again, if you look at those charts, I went back and looked, they haven't changed from last year. Our tax valuation here in Cook County ranks 34th of the 50 districts. But if you turn the page and look, our tax rate is 48th out of the 50 districts. So that shows you some of the challenges we've had with our property tax revenue. And I don't have to tell any of you that there's been a great deal of hubbub, I will use that word, furor, over appraisal district property tax valuations. You know, I think everybody's gotten their appraisal in the mail, and across the board, I think there's been record-setting increases in valuations. And when you look at Cook County, it is the let's see which one. Want to make sure I get this right, but in Cook County, tax valuations have increased between 25 and 30% across the board. And even over in Young County, Graham ISD, it's between 20 and 25% increase. But you know, one misnomer that I want to make sure everyone in here realizes, because I know there's folks in the general public that may not understand, if all property valuations have gone up 30%, that will not change anybody's tax bill, because taxing entities' tax rates will have to drop considerably to offset those increases. Now the problem is, if your property goes up 50% and someone else goes up 20%, then yeah, you're going to be paying more taxes. But if everyone's tax rate has gone up, and I think to some extent probably everyone's has, that by itself doesn't mean that people's tax bills are going to go up next year. And you'll see in some of the numbers here some of the impact of where we set the tax rate, how that will play into the final role of what a citizen in Cook County's tax bill is going to be from North Central Texas College.
And if I could, just to point out on that page 11, as you look at this, I remind the board of colleges we're compared to by the state, just to give you a sense of who is on our cohort of comparison institutions when we're benchmarked. Those include colleges like Del Mar, that includes Blinn, it does include Tyler, and it includes Central Texas at times, depending on their enrollment. And so what you begin to see is in the category of where we are being compared, we are a good amount of money less revenue in taxes, all except for Blinn. Blinn has been notoriously the lowest for years. And Northeast Texas is the only other one. Northeast wasn't even founded till 1984. So they're virtually a young. In fact, I think they were the last community college founded in the state. And so you begin to say, when the state compares us to these, and you look at Laredo, who's also in our comparison, who garner, and my stigmatism's bad, 51 million in tax revenue. It's very difficult when they're your comparative institution. And so I just keep, it's a system that has not been corrected in so many years in the state till it's just challenging. It's very challenging. And, you know, I look at South Plains, who is, I don't know if you know where that is only taxing level land. Does anybody know where level land is? And so they have the highest tax rate, though, to garner that revenue because of their desire to do that. But they can't go up much more because of their cap, as far as that goes.
There was one graph that somehow I inadvertently left out of your workbook, so it may be a little hard to see up there, but this shows the progression over the last 6-7 years of the property tax rate for NCTC. In 2006 and 2007, the total rate, M&O and INS, was in excess of 12 cents per $100 valuation. It's proceeded downward over the last half a decade to the point that this past year we're at about 9.5 cents. What is it going to be next year? Who knows? But my guess is if we did absolutely nothing and just let the valuations drop our rate, we would be in the sevens. It will definitely drop it below 8 cents. So, you know, getting into some unprecedented territory, I guess, really, with our actual tax rate. And kind of brings me to my next question. I got to thinking about this, and I decided to research and see what the answer was. When was the highest tax rate that NCTC ever had, and what was that rate? Anybody? Oh, no, because I told you the answer. But it's been 25 years. The highest tax rate was in the years 94 and 95. It was almost 13.5 cents. And now we're down to 9.5, and it's headed down toward 8 or below, depending
that
upon
was-
what we choose to do.
That was just the M&O rate at that point, correct? It was not,
I-
I don't, those, historically, I don't believe there was an INS in that. There wasn't a bond payment.
I think you're right.
think so.
I think you're right.
I don't know what it would have been on, because it was revenue for CPA, yeah.
That was before my time. So again, there's a lot of supporting documentation right there, and when we get to our meeting in August, there's a couple of very important tax rates that the appraisal district is going to set for us late in July. And those two rates they're going to calculate for us are the no new tax rate and the voter approval rate. So the no new tax rate is the rate, that's the rate which I project will be under 8 cents this time around. That's where, because of increased values, your rate drops so that you get no additional new revenue in the coming year. No new tax rate, just as it sounds, really. Voter approval rate is what we used to call the rollback rate, and it allows you to get up to 8% of additional revenue. If you choose a rate between no new tax and voter approval, you have to have public hearings, but you can generate up to 8% additional tax revenue. If you go over the voter approval, you need the approval of voters, which we used to call, you had a rollback election. And it used to be someone in the public had to call for it. Now, they've changed the law. If you choose a rate over vote approval, you have to hold an election. And with the timing this year, if we were to choose to do that, the election would be held with the November general election. Not a presidential year, an off year, but still one of the more popular election times. Would have to go to the voters for approval. If it was rejected, it would come back down to the voter approval rate. So just so you know the different options and the different connotations, there's a chart on page 20. I'll try to explain to you. This gives you some ideas of 3 different options that would be available to us. No new taxes, as you see on the right-hand column, generates no additional tax revenue. If we go up somewhere around that voter approval rate, about an 8% increase, that would generate just over $350,000 of additional revenue to the college. Dr. Wallace and I were just talking, and we said, what if the tax rate didn't change? What if we just kept the rate where it is at 9.5 cents? That's over the voter approval rate. So it would require going out to the voters, but it would generate over $1.1 million of additional revenue to the college, just keeping the same rate we have right now. And then you also see numbers, projections for Graham down below.
And I'm a bit of a broken record. I always remind us of this, but when we voted, when the taxpayers voted for the bond election in 14, the rate was 14 cents. So we have continued to drop that rate because of the property values. Dr.
We
Miller, so
projected
we
it would go up to
yeah,
14
yeah.
with the tax rate.
So that's why we only chose the 9 to say, what if we continued, if the board decided to do that? Well, if you continue with the current rate, it would generate over $1 million. I think what you need to be prepared as a board, for us as administration, our job, and I've told folks this before, our job is to do what we believe is most beneficial to the students first and foremost in serving them. You're going to find that minimally we would probably ultimately end up recommending that voter approval tax rate, which is the 350 minimally, to say that that's very much. But we did want to show you have some flexibility between that rate and the current tax rate they're paying. So. Yeah.
Than we are already.
Correct.
So it'd be interesting to see when they're revenue neutral, where they're going to end up and where we're going to end up on that program. It kind of pains me to look at how we tax compared to a whole lot of other counties. So it's just frustrating. I'm
Yes.
sorry. I think we're doing rather well at .09.
Any other questions or discussion about property tax?
Are you, I would also, Graham, just as a note on that, the valuations are doing similar things to the Graham maintenance tax. And one of the things I have to continue to remind myself on occasion is that tax rate is not determined by the Board of Regents here. That tax rate is determined by the Graham Independent School District Board. And they've been very good about maintaining a percentage that is healthy for us. And so I just remind you that they will have to make the same kind of decision with the maintenance tax.
That's correct. Thank you. I thought I would include a section this year about federal stimulus funding because that has been such an important part of our revenue stream over the past couple of years. And so I've included a chart that I've been sharing periodically with the Finance Committee as we have gone through and spent those federal dollars. And just last month, at the end of May, we essentially spent the last dollar. We drew down the last dollar of federal funds made available to us. Over the past 2.5 years, that's been almost, I believe it's $29 million. And the pie chart there, both of those, I wanted to show you that we received about 60% of those funds were awarded as institutional funds to the college. 40% were student funds that had to go to the students and had to pass through, and we were very limited on how we could use those funds, and the important thing was that it went directly to students. Well, I wanted to break out, though, and show you that even though there was a 60-40 split on institutional versus student funds, we actually chose to spend a significant portion of our institutional funds on students. So actually, students ended up receiving 56% of all these funds, and the college 44%. And what was that? Well, in many cases, one thing that we did was offered tuition discounts and special scholarships to students so that we had some say in how it was used that we didn't have with the student funds, but the ultimate recipient of those dollars was still the students. And we used those kind of as a win-win, help the students, help the college with enrollment as well. So, and I think we were very successful doing that. But I do have to say, with this new budget, that is one of the scary things moving forward is this coming year we have to have weaned ourselves totally from those federal dollars, and that's been behind almost every decision we've been making in this budget season, is knowing that we don't have that security blanket of protection by having those extra funds available to us. So that's been taken into consideration. That basically concludes my discussion of the revenue side of the budget. I next want to touch base on expenses. And without a doubt, this year we spent far more time on the expense side because, as I mentioned, some of those revenue streams, there wasn't a lot of flexibility that we had on our side as far as what we were going to do. So expenses, by far the single largest impact on the expense side of the budget comes from salaries. So I just thought I would ask, anyone want to hazard a guess about what percentage of our budget is taken up by salaries? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you're talking full-time salaries, that's right at 1/3 of our budget. But in addition to full-time salaries, we have part-time, we have adjunct pay, we have instructor overloads, we have benefits that when you add that in there, sends it to just over 50% of our budget. So we can't talk about expenses without talking about positions, salaries, personnel. The first
No, I just always like to, none of those tax dollars go to salary except in maintenance for Gainesville campus, if that makes sense. So it's interesting then, that's why you have a larger tuition rate we discussed earlier for out of district, because you have to generate revenue for faculty and staff salaries out of district from the only source you have in that case is tuition and fee. The state appropriation dollars no longer cover our faculty salaries as a district. And so the three-legged stool always comes back up of how we're funded. And so I just think it's really important to understand that as we're moving forward with the commission again, because the initial intent was state funds would cover teachers. It doesn't do that anymore for NCTC.
Correct. The first chart that you'll see in this section regarding salaries gives a history of the past 6 or 7 years regarding salary increases. And since COVID, well, 2 years ago, because of COVID, there were no salary increases. Last year, we were able to award 2% raises. But if you remember, last year, we were initiating that new salary study. So some of the increases were not equal across the board. A lot of our starting salaries increased substantially. Part of that salary study that we were not able to actually implement had to do with longevity and providing some sort of bump for tenure and seniority. And that part did not actually, well, the funds weren't there. We did not fully implement that part of the study. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that background in history, because I know you've seen on the news, but it just came out, they just announced Friday that the inflation rate for the DFW area for the month of May is at 9.1%. What I published here was 9.0. The most recent I had was the March statistics. So it's even slightly higher with the May numbers. So we knew from our standpoint as administration going in, we had to do something to help our workforce because of the challenges that our folks are facing with rising costs, gas, housing, across the board. So what we are wanting to project within this budget is a salary increase of 5%. It's still not equal to the inflation rate. But as we've gone through this process, honestly, that's a lot more than we thought was feasible when we started working on this budget. And it's only as we went further into it and it became more apparent the issues that folks are facing these days, we realized that we have to do what we can to try to help in that regard. So we are proposing with these budget figures 5% increase. And I think it's important to note one way we want to implement that. A lot of times in the past, We have given raises by giving it as a percentage of the midpoint. And so whatever band you're in, the midpoint, we would calculate so no one could really tell exactly based on what their salary were, if they were getting 5%, if they were getting 6.5%, if they were getting 3.5%, it all depended. Well, what we realized is if we implement what I call just an across-the-board 5%, it's basically 5% of your salary. For those people that are above the starting level, they will get a slightly higher increase than those at the starting level. So that's some of that longevity that we were not able to do for our folks last year by just making this an across-the-board, literally 5% of the salary. Then those that are above the lowest level they're in the middle somewhere, will truly get the full percentage increase. So, we welcome feedback on that. That's our thought. That's the way we thought would be a fair way to implement this year. You also have pages there. Last year, I think we fell into a habit of not addressing part-time wages. And as you can see from that chart on page 27, we, in many cases, went 3, 4, 5 years without addressing it. And so we said, our part-time workers have the same struggles with inflation that our full-time workers have. So what we're wanting to propose is adjunct pay would be an increase of $20 per hour or load unit. We've been at $6.50 per load unit. That'd take it up to $6.70. It would get a 3-hour class up over kind of that magic $2,000 level. It'd be, I believe, what was the number, 2025 or 2010? 2010, yeah. And then some of our other part-time instructional wages would, and across the board, our hourly workers would have a $2 an hour increase, whether it's minimum wage or some of our instructional departments that get paid on an hourly wage rate. Part-time, yeah. Again, I've included the TCCTA salary study results, and what I really think, what I want you to see, we made a concerted effort last year to improve our faculty salaries, and our faculty now, our full-time faculty ranked 25th in the state, which is right smack dab in the middle, but I think it's been a long time since we've been at that level. And I think last year we were ranked 28th, now it's up to 25th. And on part-time, we actually increased with the changes we made last year. We were able to increase where we ranked 37th a year ago. We now moved up to 27th. So I really think we're in a spot that's improving.
What we typically are faced with, and our deans are here and can attest to that, our deans and chairs that are here can attest, when you look at where we're pulling our part-time and full-time faculty talent from, your comparative institutions that you are drawing from are in the DFW area. And so the competitive market associated with that is really challenging, and that's why we continue to try to do something on both spectrums, full and part-time. I'm really proud of this. I mean, I think, and I have to compliment our full-time faculty and our faculty senate and others. They will often say, hey, help the part-timer, and they sometimes have been known to sacrifice themselves to do that. But I'm very pleased that we've moved up to midpoint among the 50 colleges for our full-time. That's where we are as an institution. And then to be at the same almost level for part-time for the TCCTA studies really are a lot of improvement for us. And so I applaud us being able to do that and your previous support for us moving that way. But one of the things that's a challenge is trying to pull from the Dallas market and the Tarrant County market and the Weatherford market, and some of those that have in the past have beat us on that salary line, but we're coming along quite well.
And I think I should say that the administrative team working on this budget, we really focused a lot on minimizing the growth of full-time positions, even though there were areas that had what many felt were demonstrated needs. We really felt like we needed to focus on the existing personnel. And so we've done some modest reorganizing. We've done some restructuring in some cases with different positions. We've had some high-salaried personnel that have left that we've tried to somehow reincorporate those duties so we didn't have to go back with another high-level salary. So we've really been trying to focus on that to make this feasible. And honestly, I was amazed the other day when I looked at this that we're going to, as proposed here, we would be giving approximately $1 million of raises. But our full-time instructor budget will actually be going up less than $25,000 from the previous year. And that's because of, looking at these vacant positions, not filling everything that has come open, but being strategic with how we fill those openings. So any other feedback from you regarding that would definitely be appreciated. And if there's no immediate questions, we'll move on and look at the budget summary.
Just as on pages 30 and 31, you continue to see the cost associated with employee benefits. I'm the one that harps on all that what was and now what isn't, but I remind you that the state's ability to support benefits is contingent on enrollment growth over a period of time, and so we've continued to see a decline over the sector of community colleges in benefit coverage by the state itself. So a new employee that comes in that used to maybe say, okay, the state will pick up a portion of those benefits more than others, we are picking up far more percentages now of the overall benefit package than we would have 10 or 15 years ago. So that's why you see that increase, because unless you show over a period of time massive enrollment growth, the state will not fund the benefits for new employees.
As you look at the budget summary, you'll see that what is actually presented is a balanced budget. I believe as the numbers are there is a surplus of $8,000, and Robbie said this morning that's his. But we'll.
Yeah, Robbie's always grabbing extra money.
But a lot will happen between now and August. This will be a fluid document. It's going to change. There will be revenue changes, expense changes as we move forward and we get close to that final budget. But basically, last year's budget was $61.1 million. This budget is 61.6. So has been a very slight increase of about $500,000 in the overall budget. On the revenue side, what I'd kind of like to do is just go through these pages on the summary and maybe some of what may be considered significant changes. I'll call your attention to them and try to briefly explain them to you. I should state on the revenue side, one of the only things that has changed significantly is I did, of my own volition, I plugged in an 8% increase in the property tax revenue. Again, as board, y'all will determine what that property tax rate is. So this would be an income number that would be generated from something right at but slightly under that voter approval rate.
And the voter approval rate is not requiring to go to the voter. It's
That's
the
right.
open hearing. Just, that gets real confusing from the old verbiage, for me
It's
at least.
the old rollback rate.
It's the old rollback rate, yeah.
And so it technically is at 8%, so as long as we're 7.99 or lower.
Mm-hmm. Question.
As we move into the expenses or the uses of funds, I want to applaud all of our community here at the college, all the different departments. Everyone was tasked and asked at the beginning of the budget process to bring forth new budget with 5% reductions. And of course, every area could not do that. There are certain expenses that we're going to incur that could not be just selectively cut by 5%. But everybody did a good job of bringing forward savings where they could. And to give you a few issues that arose, as I said earlier, we no longer have government funds. For a couple of years, there's a lot of things we've been buying with government money. We've been buying some IT items. Well, we're not going to be able to use those funds anymore, so we have to put them back in the budget. So there are some departments that have some significant increases. It's not that all of a sudden they're spending a lot more money. It's just they had some significant purchases that were paid with federal funds, so they weren't in the previous year's budget, and we had to get them back in there. On the expenses, there's a six-figure drop there in federal and student financial aid funds, and that is almost entirely due to a reduction in TPEG funds. That's the Texas Public Education Grant. That's what we as a college have to, statutorily, we have to set aside a certain percentage of our tuition revenue for scholarships for students. And we really hadn't looked at that for a couple of years, and because our enrollment has dropped, the amount that we have to set aside for those TPEG grants has also dropped. So that was the bulk of that $179,000 drop in state financial aid. General institutional has dropped by over $100,000, and most of that comes from the fact that as it sits right now, we have a smaller contingency built into this budget. Last year it was almost $700,000. We've plugged in $500,000 in this particular budget. I'd love to have a larger contingency, and that may be where Robbie's $8,000 ends up, but we'll see.
Well, speaking of Robbie, no, I mean, we are very concerned not to have at least $500,000 in contingency, because premiums and now with storm damage, our TASB dues have gone up considerably. That's built in the budget, but now where it used to be maybe $100,000 of a payment to then repair roof or repair is now been up to what, 200,000, I think, doubled. And so you want to have that in your contingency in case of a impending thunderstorm, which is a regular occurrence. And so when I first became president, we had a contingency of about 150,000. That was a premium for one disaster, and so that's why you see that we've upped that. So, but we think 500 is good compared to the 750. So.
The last couple of things that I wanted to call your attention are on page 41. And about a third of the way down, you'll see that Flower Mound maintenance and operations is dropping over $800,000. Well, if you'll go down to the middle of the page, under plant fund expenditures revenue bonds, that has increased 710,000. That's the refinancing that we did with the revenue bonds. So by incurring that new revenue bond payment of 710,000, we're saving 826,000 in rental payments that was coming out of that Flower Mound M&O budget. So that was a very sound financial move we made earlier this year that's saving us over $100,000 in this budget. And then the last thing, we have added a budget item for Alliance, and I'm going to ask Dr. Wallace to say a little more about this.
So the Alliance location, what we wanted to do in building the budget was not, typically when we've done leases, you've had us come forward with build out built into lease. If that's been a custom. Well, the days of build outs in the DFW area, including such things, are pretty much at an end, because what happens now is demand is so high that you have to sort of be up front with those. If you remember, the board resolved in the last board meeting to place on me the requirement to fulfill and execute that lease. What we've chosen to do, rather than increase that $250,000 a year maintenance and operation budget for Alliance, we are moving forward with utilizing some of the unrestricted monies that came through our lost revenue that Dr. Miller spoke to early on. So we will be spending $1 million, $1.1 million in Alliance in the next few months, but it will be garnered through those funds rather than being a part of the budget. That way we are simply paying lease and lease alone for the next duration of that lease, rather than putting lease and build out on top of that. We have the True Initiative and the True Grants that have come forward, and they are doing tremendous amount of funding of some of the personnel things, and more importantly, the equipment associated with those facilities. So that's a savings, but we will be spending some of those lost revenue dollars on that project. And so I just notifying you, there's no action to be taken on that because you acted to make me fulfill the lease, but I did want to let you know why that shows as not a terribly difficult number. We're trying to get that executed, and we are told we will be in there by no later than September 1, but we really are needing August 1 is what they're saying will happen, and so those monies will move quickly to do that. So, but we are open to any questions you may have about that. It's just a different kind of environment in the Alliance area than, for example, when we rented Pennell Square or something along those lines. But I also am very proud of the fact that, these are some exciting numbers in the sense that Corinth is paid for. Yay. And those of you that have been here when it was opened go already. But yes, 20 years it is paid for. The Center for the Performing Arts is paid for. The Flower Mound campus now belongs officially to us. It is not a lease. It is our property, and that revenue bond is saving. And we did not extend the time to pay it off. Those are some really dramatically impressive moves, I think, for the college to say we're reinvesting now in Alliance some of the money we would have been investing in Corinth for those years to continue to serve Denton County. So, I think that's exciting, and for the staff to be saying, hey, Corinth is paid for is really thrilling if you've officed there for years and understand that. So those are some key highlights of that section as well. Questions about that?
That basically concludes my overview of the budget. And again, any questions you may have, and even if your questions aren't tonight, anything between now and the actual vote on the budget, which will take place at the August meeting, please reach out and let myself or Dr. Wallace know. We are fluid with these numbers, and there are things that we know will change between now and then. So we can take action between now and then, so everyone's comfortable with what's being voted on the final budget at the August board meeting.
And in August, you'll receive the calendar for any decisions you make regarding the tax, and those dates will be provided for that by Dr. Miller at that time as well. But we do, honestly, any questions you have for us, if you have questions about any particular line items, we really are more than willing to answer those, and there's no wrong question.
Any questions?
One more statement, Madam Chairman. You'll see there could be in the future questions about numbers of staffing positions related to enrollment. We've had those internal conversations and multiple times among the district officers here, and we've struggled with that ourselves. But we would argue that much of the support mechanism that's required to get a student in the door is contingent on those. And if you strictly looked at the budget and said, well, we've got the same number of employees, for example, we did when we had 10,000 students. The problem was when we had 10,000 students, we weren't doing the work we're doing today that is now essential for the student's success. For example, we didn't have pathways at the level we do today. We didn't have intrusive advising models for health science students where they don't miss out on lines of there's no lost hours. Now, we didn't have discipline-specific advising in the past where you said, okay, I'm going to be a kinesiology major at the University of North Texas. Well, these are the things you need to do, and X person is the expert for that. The sad thing is the state doesn't fund wraparound services. There is no funding for student wraparound service. And yet the conversation, and Madam Chairman, you've heard this in the steering committee for the commission through TAC and CCAT, that's a problem because the wraparound services are where a lot of the work gets before they ever get to the classroom for being successful or not. And that's the argument we're making is wraparound service needs to be funded and in a big way. But if you look strictly at the dollars and you look strictly at the numbers, I would argue that when we had 10,000 students, we weren't doing the job we are today with those students. Now, the other side of that is we've done such a good job that you'll also see the numbers of hours that they have upon transfer has gone down, and we're penalized for doing a good job. Because that would have been revenue. When in 2014, we were at about 96 hours was the average hour a student transferred. Now it's at 70. You lost that, but you did what's right for the student. And that's a challenge. But we're open to any conversation, any questions you have about that. But you would, if you look just kind of cursory at it, you'd go, well, wait a minute, we have the same amount of students. I mean, yeah. Correct. That is correct.
200
That is correct, yes.
So that the staff that we do have, although the levels essentially have maintained no matter what the student level is, we've created a situation where they're doing the work and we don't need the part-time.
That is correct.
As much. So the budget turns out to be better when you look at the overall employment picture than you thought it might be because of that. So yay
Absolutely.
for the people who have stayed full-time. That's all good.
Yes. Yeah, we always worry about accreditation standards and SACs and the full to part-time ratio between your faculty especially. And we're in a healthy position comparatively, and we weren't questioned in the accreditation process on that. That's a good place to be. Yes.
Okay.
Comments or questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And everybody's hard work. I know it's a big part of the job, for sure. Yes, it's a village. All right, the next item on our agenda is the citizens' communication. Sandy, have we had anybody asked to address the board? Thank you. The next item would be reports to the board financial. Dr. Miller? Do we not?
We don't actually have a financial report because
Okay.
of the nature where we are in the process.
All
So
right,
yes,
good.
it'll be the end.
Well, skip right on past
You
that.
just had
then.
a really large
Yeah, we
financial.
did. All right, the next item is our consideration of consent agenda items. Are there any one of those, A through D, that need to be removed for independent discussion? No? All right, therefore, I would accept a motion to approve the consent agenda items as is
We accept
presented.
the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Hagan. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Ott. Thank you very much. Additional discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye and raising your right hand, please. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, so the next item on our agenda is executive session, and I do believe we need to have one of those this evening. So I will read a quick statement before we enter into executive session. The Board of the board will now recess their regular meeting and go directly into executive session as provided for in the following Texas Government Code. Section 551.071, consultation with attorney. So we appreciate everyone's attendance. If you'd like to wait outside, then if we're not long, we'll invite everyone back in at the end. Thank you, yeah. Yeah, and will the cabinet stay, please? Thank you.